well with the Retro Hour, and we have today an amazing guest, Matt Porter. Matt Porter worked for Argonaut on some great titles. Croc, which was one of the most famous there. Creature Shock as well, which was a really interesting early title with a lot of interesting FMV in there. Scooby-Doo Mysteries as well, and Red Dog Superior Firepower. Also, SWAT, which is really interesting. SWAT Global Strike Team. I kind of love the first SWAT game going on to console, so we're going to talk about that. But first, Matt, how are you doing?
Great, thank you. Really pleased to be here, so thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm doing great.
Oh, it's good to have you on. I know you've listened to the podcast before, so you probably know what the first question is, which is, what was your first video game experience?
Right, interesting. I was thinking about this earlier, and I think as probably everyone says, that Atari VCS is either Combat or Space Invaders, probably early 1980s at a friend's house. But we didn't actually have in our family a game system until 82. So there's a period where I just frequented arcades when I could, or picked up Game & Watches, and in the end I had to save up, scrimp and save, wash cars, etc., dishwash, and pick up my VCS for myself. So I think the VCS, that's the one, it's the first to capture my heart. But beyond that, straight onto a Spectrum and Commodore 64 and Amiga eventually.
Straight in with the big ones and the Specky and the 64. So, I mean, tell us about, everyone's kind of got a story about, their first machine and what they were kind of doing on it and how they got it. I mean, so the Spectrum, when you moved from a console to a computer then, what kind of happened then? How did you get hold of the Spectrum? Why did you pick that machine and what were you doing on it?
Well, I always wanted a computer and the Atari, and I always wanted a computer just to play games. Let's not cut to the chase. There's obviously educational benefits, etc., but it was
like what we told our parents, yeah.
And I do remember my mother actually saying, sort of in the mid '80s, get off those games. You never make a living out of them. She's probably right, but I managed to get a career from it. But I wanted the option to be able to look at coding in the long term. The reality is that I actually spent more time gaming initially, and no time for coding. I dabbled with a little bit of machine code on the Z80, on the Specky, but it was all about the games. And I did actually have to save up for my VCS. I played that to death. Cartridges then were 30 or 40 quid, so I only had a few, and sort of there's only so many times you can clock Frogger before you get bored of it. But I saved up quickly for a Spectrum, and I just got that in mid '83, I think. And from then on, it was just trying to level up, to save up a little bit more and trade it in for the next thing, which was 64. But the Specky was, that was a wonderful machine and a wonderful time to get it, because so many creative, so many authors that are still around, many of which are still around today, or who are still around today. But, it's such a variety of games and experiences there. Quite a lot of sort of quirky, shall we say, titles that you'd never want to play now, but historically quite an important time, I think, for the industry. A lot of personality then, I think, that went missing for a good while. And has started to come back with, the rise of indie games and things like that. So I think that for me was the main appeal for the early days. And, people like Matthew Smith and Jeff Minter were very much authors that brought their personality into the titles. So you could get a feel of who the person was behind the game, then, which made many of those early titles really interesting to play. But so that was sort of rambling a little bit, but that was my early experiences. As I went on, I think I got the Amiga in '88. So I traded in I kept my 64 for that because I was working. So I managed to keep the 64 on the Amiga. And then consoles just came into sort of the UK around the late 80s. So I suddenly started wanting Super Nintendos and things like that. So I think the Amiga was the last computer I had. And then from then it's been consoles.
Were you a Super Nintendo guy then over Mega Drive?
Oh, it's console wars. Come on, I thought we'd say goodbye to those. I think initially, yeah. My heart was on Mario World and F-Zero, especially Mario World and Pilot Wings, actually. So those Mode 7 games. As soon as the icons in 1990 started appearing with the F-Zero and Pilot Wings and Tales and Mode 0 screens, you just wanted that. And actually, Mario was fantastic for a long time. That was my favourite title, as it is for many. But actually, over time, I think. I've picked up the Mega Drive subsequently, and over time I think it's just leveled out. They both offer different experiences. They're both good for different things. I think it's good now seeing them come back. There's a resurgence in development on those machines and people pushing them. And it's not necessarily my generation, the old and crusties. It's really nice to see a younger generation getting behind these things. But I think first and foremost, Super Nintendo, and for me.
Well, let's take it back to those Spectrum days again and the C64. I mean, how did you originally get into programming then? And did you find it easy to pick up? Tell us kind of the journey there. What happened?
So this is interesting that. I was a gamer for all of the 80s. I picked up and dabbled with machine code on and off, but it's out of books and it's just like, get the program running. Does it work? Yeah. Okay. Move on. But I was just playing games. But I actually steered my education to get into games. I didn't know really how to do it, but I did know that I would likely need some qualifications behind me, and I'd likely need computer science and computer studies and things like that. So I really was programming primarily during the 80s as part of my studies, and recreation on my computers was just playing games. Now, when I left college, when I left school, I went to Thames Polytechnic. It is a university now, so not that there's anything wrong with Polytechnic, but it's Greenwich University. So I went to Greenwich University, and I did computer science again with the mind to give me a degree that I could have a chance of getting into the industry. I moved. As part of that, I had a sandwich course at Marconi Avionics, which was a airplane manufacturer, was local to me, and we were actually developing software for the Tornado planes. So I did a lot of Z80 coding during that year, and then when I finished, and that was a sandwich course, I finished my final year of degree and went back full time and continued that. And that was early, that would be 92 or 93. So I remember that year I was writing off to lots of software houses saying, look, I've got a degree. Can I have a job? I know I love games and I love what you do. Pretty much they probably get 101 of these things every day. But I did get rejected from many of them. And I was beginning to think, actually, I need to actually give them a demo or a product and not just say I'm interested because, I'm just coming across as a fanboy. What was really a strange coincidence in this tiny little office in Chatham in North Kent was I had a chance encounter in a cafeteria with someone else who worked there. Now, bear in mind, there's like 5,000 people on site in this place of work, and we all have little separate offices, and hardly anyone within reason knows each other, knows everyone. But I bumped into this guy queuing up for my chips and got chatting, and he just turned around and said, oh my best friend, my sister's fiance's best friend works at Argonaut. And it's like, okay, that's interesting. So what are the chances of that? And here's the address to write to. I could have a word. So he did have a word, and I got invited to an interview early 94, which I wasn't expecting that at all. But I had to quickly scramble a demo to take. So I did some texture map cube on the PC in assembler. and a scrolling demo. And that was my first real. I need to make a product and get it finished. So I got that finished and took that up with me and managed to get the job off the back of that. So really, I learned gaming coding during my time at Argonaut onwards. I learned on the job, so to speak.
What was the setup at Argonaut like then? Was it a huge company back then, or was it quite tiny?
It was tiny then, and I think it was in Colindale. It was a little. I remember it was pretty much a little shack, but had a couple of floors, and we were crammed in. I think there's about 50 people when I joined. I think subsequently it went up to near 200 plus, but when I joined it was 50 people, 2 floors, and each little corner of that office had a different project going. So Scooby was in one corner. In another, we had someone working on Creature Shop 3DO, which you mentioned earlier. I remember also Jag Dev kits there, so must have been working on the Jaguar Creature Shock at the same time, but I don't think that actually came out in the end.
Yeah, I think they released like a demo of it, a kind of unreleased thing, and then it never came out in the end. Yeah.
And then another corner had, I remember my first day, I'm coming into this place as primarily a fanboy. I am loving their games, and actually being toured around the office on the first day, a little bit starstruck. We had Mike Powell, I remember, working in one corner on his own with a QA guy and a SNES dev kit working on a game called Vortex on Super Effects. And, I remember that Mike's games were things I just played, I just knew him by name from magazines, and Vortex was actually I remember the week before I'd been reading about in Edge, going, look, that looks fantastic, and turn up on my first day and there it is being developed. It was amazing. But there's normally about 5 or 6 titles, I think, on the go, and we had some coders and engineers over in Japan working with Nintendo on various Super Effects titles. I think Stunt Racer Wild Tracks was the one on the go at the time.
Well, you mentioned there that Scooby-Doo Mystery was in development at the time. So was that the first title that you worked on? And what do you kind of remember about working on that game?
Yes, it was the first title I worked on. What do I remember on that? I remember the first 3 months or first 2 months are quite horrendous for me, because I got a reality check that I really should have been doing coding for fun prior to starting up the job. I was expected correctly to hit the ground running. And I remember being given a SNES dev kit, which is massive number of pages with translated interestingly in places from Japanese. So there's some errors in there. But basically, so I handed this and said, get on with it. Some sprites, got Shaggy and Scooby. We had some tiles already created and a scrolling level that a previous coder had put together quickly. I think their expectation was, for me to get on with it, and we'd come back in a few months and show us a game, which I completely understand. But having come from very little experience, certainly in games writing, to being put on the spot, so to speak, I did struggle. So it was a learning, it's a trial by fire, and I think it needed the mentorship of one of the Argonaut coders returning back from Japan, Colin Reed, who's now at I believe he's now at Turn 10 Studios, so working on the Forza games. But Colin would finished with Japanese development. He returned, and they paired him up with me to give me a fighting chance, so to speak, but actually to get the game done. But I learned so much just from watching an experienced coder show me the ropes, and I also then got a little bit of security, knowing that the game was being handled by an experienced person, and I could sort of have more time to learn the ropes more gracefully, so to speak. So I started off with intros and mini games and things like that as I got familiar with the machine, whilst Colin sort of matured the engine. But Colin left a couple of months in, but by that stage he'd taken me to a level where I was able to pick up and just take over the ship. And, I think from June or July 94 onwards, I was self-sufficient and able to stand on my own 2 feet. So I remember that, that always sticks in my mind. More so because of looking back in hindsight, it's what Colin gave me, that experience. And, I can't put too much value on having a good mentor behind you.
Were you kind of just left to your own devices in the minigame area? And just kind of like given free reign pretty much.
It's interesting. It's interesting looking back now, but I mean, it's like a kid in a candy store then. Basically, we had design meets, and it was a producer sitting us down saying, "Hey guys, what do you want to do? I'm thinking about a mini game. You can have that, Matt. Let's put it in the kitchen." And that was it. That was a design brief. So, and then, what needing from me to get a number of man days to put on the schedule. So that's my brief. I've got to do a kitchen game. I've got no frame of reference. How long does that take? Let's make up a number. So it was similar across the board. We had a number of mini games and a number of sort of areas of UI and things where we had creative freedom. And I think there's good and bad on that. Well, the good is obviously you get to do within reason what you want. But the bad is, there's not always the constraints that need to be there.
And there was the one with Scooby and Shaggy, where Shaggy's chucking stuff out the fridge. Yeah, Scooby's got to make like sandwiches and with all the ingredients.
I love making that. I think that may have come from a quite, let's say, wild night at a drinking establishment. But that was the brief for the brief was a kitchen game. That was let's do something in the kitchen. And I thought, what could we do? I mean, Scooby and Shaggy is all about the eating, obviously, the ghost hunting as well. But eating features a lot. So I figured would set this game in the kitchen. Shaggy would be raiding an infinitely stocked fridge because the food doesn't run out. But the idea is, if you can see my hands, that you've got Scooby at the front with empty hands to start with, and food's coming, and you're going left and right to catch it, and you've really got to pile up the biggest sandwich on both hands because you can get unbalanced if you get too much or too little. So you can get top heavy and the whole thing collapses and it's game over. So that was the rational starting point. And that's what the game ended up with. But and looking back, there's so much over-engineering there because it was my first game. So I wanted to get all the details in, impress as much as I could. But I think some of the subtleties are lost on pretty much everyone other than me. But each piece of food has got a friction value. So if you put the cheese on the pickles, it's more likely to slide along and make it more difficult to move quickly. And I think I also put bonus multipliers for the combinations of food. So if you put a bat down and then caught a sausage on top of it, and then the top of the bat on top of that is a hot dog. So you got, the game doesn't present it as a hot dog bonus, but internally the code's working out. You've got a hot dog in your pile of food. I think Ashley probably could have and should have saved that time and put it to something a little bit more substantial on the game. But it was good fun.
And you were in the game as well, right? Because there's One-Eyed Matt and Captain Porter. I imagine those names weren't an accident.
Oh yeah. What's the chances? Yeah, that was an interesting time in the industry. I think we could get away with a lot more than certainly could get away with a lot more than you did now. But yeah, there was opportunity to name the villains and the characters. Obviously, the Scooby Gang are sacred, so you can't touch those. But yeah, we put. I think the first mission or episode is set on the Red Ryan boat. So for my sins, I'm a Man United fan. So
right.
Red Ryan for Ryan Giggs and Captain One-Eyed Matt and Captain Porter were the villains. So One-Eyed Matt's the villain, And then when he's unmasked, it's One-Eyed Matt. So, yeah, I managed to sneak my name in. But pretty much everyone on team has got representation in there. I think there's Mickey Mindang, the circus clown, and he's named after Giant Mindang. And then we had Bradshaw Manor and Drabwell Ranch. You know, they're our producers and our artists, and it goes on. So I think everyone's represented, and it's great. It's great we managed to get a little bit of ourselves in there. The other thing is, and you can't tell. I don't know why we put this so much effort into it. We can't tell on a shrunken 16 pixel by 16 pixel character set. But one of the intros, I remember the gravestones in the back. I etched the initials, or I put the initials of some of my best mates at the time in. Not that you can tell, but the effort to go through to get that in. Again, sort of might be better use of dev time. But yeah, there's a lot of personality in that game. And the other thing we did, and burnt a lot of the cartridge, but something we wouldn't do nowadays for sure. But we had a team. We had a team picture taken one Christmas, I think Christmas '94. We all just went off to get some recreation, and we took a team picture whilst we were there. We all dressed up in cowboy clothes, and then we decided to digitize that picture and get it into the game. And God knows how many megs that took up of. Basically we could have put another level in, I guess. But so it's a little bit indulgent, so we say, in places.
Like you said, though, it gives it personality, doesn't it?
Does.
It was your game, it makes complete sense. One thing I was wondering as well is kind of what Argonaut's relationship with Sega was like at that time. And do you remember when you first saw a Sega Saturn and what you thought of that system?
So the relationship with Sega, I wasn't aware that there was any special relationship, certainly not in the way that there was with Nintendo. I think we had a contract with Nintendo to do X amount of Super Effects games. So to memory, there wasn't any Sega development when I started there. The first contact with Saturn. So I remember, was it Christmas '94, just before when it launched? I think December '94. Both of them launched, both Saturn and PlayStation in Japan, pretty much within a week of each other from memory. But I remember Jez calling everyone down into what would have been one of the boardrooms, and we had TV set up there just for demos, and he'd got Virtual Fighter running and Ridge Racer, so take your pick. You can play either the consoles of the day, and that was my first sight of a Saturn, the VF game. And they were both stunning to see then. Actually, Argonaut had a Virtual Fighter machine. I don't know how we got anything done thinking back. We had a common room. It had a pool table, free play, and it had a Virtual Fighter machine, free play. So, it must have been really disciplined to actually get any work done there. But I'd obviously spent some time with the arcade cabinet, and to see that on the Saturn. I mean, it's not perfect, and looking back, there's a lot of differences that you rose-tinted spectacles remember. But yeah, that was impressive to see. And then Ridge Racer next to it on the PlayStation. Yeah, the new generation definitely had arrived at that point. So I think that was the first chance we'd seen. And then shortly after, we got dev kits in, I think early '95, to start Creature Shock on.
They must have had dev kits for everything then, because they were like 3DO, there were CDI titles being done. I can imagine like the space with all these dev kits and different versions of games being ported.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one, but we wouldn't have had. Actually, at that point, I didn't see too many Amigas and STs around, so I know that had been part of the history of Argonaut before, but by that stage it's all primarily PC or consoles. So dev kit wise, yeah, I think you're right, we had pretty much everything. Handhelds, possibly nothing there, but yeah, that's everything through up to Jag CD, and I think 32X we probably didn't have, or Mega Drive, but yeah, I've pretty much seen most of the dev kits from that 32-bit era onwards.
How would this generation of CDs? They'd had new technology. They had to invent audio streaming. They had to invent video streaming off the CD. How did games like Microcosm kind of help? When you were porting Creature Shock.
Well, most of the sequences for Creature Shock, or most of the sequence playing for Creature Shock had been done for the PC, so they'd already been written. We had to transpose that to the consoles. The seek times and things like that are slightly different. The streaming libraries are slightly different across the platforms. So I do remember that there was quite a lot of difficulty initially, certainly on the PlayStation, with getting stable streaming going. We went back and forth quite a bit with Sony on that, and the libraries were early at that time and maturing almost weekly, bug fixes and stuff. So, but I think it's a relatively simple system. There's not too much complexity, and certainly not any data streaming going on with Creature Shock. So it was pretty much get movie playback as quickly as you can off of the CD, and as performant as you can, so that the reaction times were as good as they could be for players. But most of the heavy lifting there had been done, certainly the game engine, by the PC team. So there weren't too many challenges there.
I was quite interested in that process as well, because, like we kind of touched on then, around that era, there's so many different kind of platforms that, had very short lifespans, 3DO, Jaguar, CD32, I remember coming along for a bit as well. So, in terms of the architecture, all these systems were very different, including the PC, totally different to consoles at the time. Was it a tough process porting games like that from the PC to like the Saturn?
Well, some things were relatively straightforward. I'm oversimplifying here, but something like an FMV player is once you've ported the code to play the FMV, once you've ported the assets that is the FMV, and once you've got a stable set of libraries that can stream that data off of the disk, it should just work. There's a big quotes there. And the porting exercise is pretty much make exactly what's on the PC happen as performant on the new hardware. Now, obviously, there's a chance potentially to up-res the video if the formats support higher resolution. I think we did that with Creature Shock from memory. But where it gets different is on the more complex is Creature Shock has actually got real-time sections as well, as you probably know. So there's some flying sections there. And those had to be written from scratch. We didn't share anything from the PC because the rendering libraries for the consoles, completely different APIs there, and actually completely different opportunities on consoles. I think the PCs are relatively, from memory, relatively sprite-based experience on Creature Shock, and I think on 3DO as well. When we took that to the consoles, we had an opportunity to turn those sprites into real 3D objects and do a little bit more, certainly in terms of lighting and transformations and effects and things. But we were basically rewriting those sections from scratch. There's a little bit more involvement there than the sections of FMV, which were relatively straightforward port of what the PC had already offered. So that was interesting to write. At the time, Argonaut had a technology team who were in a different building, very close by, but they were working on a set of APIs called Brenda, and those were intended to be cross-platform rendering APIs for I think there were a few external developers making use of them, or at least intending to. I think the days of DirectX turning up sort of made much of that sort of moot. But at the time, mid-90s, that's what we were hanging our shirts off using. So the internal Argonaut team came into Creature Shock with the intention of writing the real-time sections and making use of this B-render tech that the technology team are doing, and hopefully using that as a showcase of, hey, here's what the B-render tech can deliver. We've done a game with it. The reality was a little bit, it's less idealistic than that, or less ideal than that, because that technology was still developing itself. So we were pretty much beta testing drops of that library as alongside having to write a game, and it was, it's a bit 2 steps forward, 1 step back at times in terms of progress. So yeah, the answer to your question, it is a little bit more involved, I think, on the real time sections of Creature Shop.
Well, I was wondering how a kind of Yoshi racing game then led to Croc, and what was the kind of background of that as well, and how far did it get developed?
Okay, so I'm going to say 2 things here. One is Jez has got a lot more insight on this. I don't want to say anything that may be untrue or misrepresenting. I think there was a lot of conversations around making use of Yoshi IP in an Argonaut title that happened at board level, at Jez level, where I wasn't privy to. So I don't want to pry too deep into that. But from my recollection and memories, there's a couple. One, I remember once we finished Creature Shock, Saturn finished first, and it was Tony Lloyd and Lewis Gordon, who were both then went on to develop Croc. They had worked on the Saturn Creature Shock. They finished first. That title got passed by Sega pretty quickly, and then they were in a space where they could move on to the next gig. I was still with the PlayStation Creature Shock. That had quite a difficult, challenging birth, shall we say. So I was on there for a few more months whilst Tony and Lewis were able to progress the next thing, which would eventually be Croc. But I do remember, and I'm desperately trying to see if I've got this demo or any of it on some of the hard drive content that I've recently recovered. But I do remember seeing a Saturn build with Yoshi racing down a canyon, which is a prototype that Lewis and Tony had put together. They had this running. I don't know what happened to that build, and as I said, I think there might be a chance I can recover that. But that was early. That would have been late 95, early 96. That very quickly became Croc. Yoshi was gone. New character started up. I think within the space of a couple of months, Croc had taken over from Yoshi. What I've found recently, so just to give some context, I've had an old PC up in the loft for best part of 30 years. And a couple of years ago, I tried to recover, tried to get it down and see what was on it, fearing the disc was going to die at some point. But I figured there might be something interesting on it. I would actually wanted to get Croc source code for Saturn because a wild dream of mine is maybe to have another go at prodding around with it and improving it in my old age and retirement. So that was a motivation. But the drive didn't work, and I spent hours and hours just trying to get this damn thing going. I gave up on it, and then I had another go at it sort of just after I got invited to the Nottingham talk. So this would have been back in April this year, and it worked. I had some contacts. I quickly got everything I could off of it, and I started looking through. So one of the things I found on there is a set of source code and some executables dated. The earliest I've seen is dated March 95. And the executable's called Yoshi. And the source code is commented as Yoshi Riders. And I managed to get that running. And there's not too much in it. It's a track editor. But it shows, that time frame shows how long the discussions had been going, the plans had been going, because by March 95, there had been some serious effort to get something up and running. Whilst we have been developing Creature Shock in parallel, someone in the studio had been investing time doing a Yoshi-esque, at least level editor. So I've managed to get some of that scrambled. I showed that recently at the Nottingham show. what I could run in DOSBox. But there's several other sort of folders and files on this drive. So I'm hoping that at least there'd be some evolutionary progress from there to what eventually became of it that we can show and share. I think there is a Saturn image on there. It will take me or someone burning it to a CD to see if it actually runs. But yeah, it's interesting. There was certainly some considerable development effort, and certainly from what I know from Jez's interviews, serious discussion at board level of progressing a Yoshi title. Now, eventually, as I said, that became Croc, and we didn't look back. But it did start with Nintendo's Green Dinosaur, for sure.
Was Croc kind of developed after Mario 64 went into development? Because it's got a similar kind of style in the sense of that N64 look, to a platform that hadn't really arrived on the Saturn or the PlayStation yet.
Yeah, I think Croc had started up with serious development before Mario 64's launch. I'm trying to get the time frames right in my head. I think Mario 64's summer 96 from memory. That's an N64 release. So Croc would have been going for about 4 or 5 months as Croc, as we know it, before that. But we were all... None of us were living in a bubble, right? So we could all see shows like the Space World and the magazines, and Croc. Mario didn't just appear, had quite a big lead up, quite a lot of hype behind it. So I think, and we're all Nintendo geeks and freaks there. We loved everything about Mario and Yoshi and things like that. So we're all influenced, I think, by knowing what was coming. I think Mario 64 we'd seen footage of. I think before that we'd had titles like Jumping Flash on the PlayStation, which I think is probably my first recollection of a 3D platformer. So we were aware of the opportunities of doing platforming in a 3D space, and I think prior to that everyone had been doing... Majority of things have been fighting in the platform in a 3D space, or 3D shooting on rails in a 3D space. No one had seriously invested time in full 3D platforming. So I think we developed it knowing that others were. I think we developed it with the knowledge of what was coming from Nintendo. Did we copy it? No. Was it our own thing? Absolutely. I think you can see a lot of influence from Mario in there, as it's touched many games of that time. But you can also see a lot of our Britishness in there, and our Croc's very much his own character with his own lore.
How much did the learning process behind Creature Shock help when you were working on Croc then? Did you take many lessons from that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think one lesson we'd taken was needing from a game's only as good as the content that can be created on it, and that's only as good as the developer, as the designers behind it, and their ability to get their ideas into the game as quickly as possible. So there was a focus to get a level editor up, so Croced, which became the place where the designers put together the levels. Equally, being able to quickly iterate on game object behavior rather than hard code it and sit around a loop and wait for a compilation step and a linking step to complete, and then loading the game and then seeing if it worked or not. There's quite a lot of investment put into a scripting language. I think it's called Strats. If you talk to some of the Argonaut coders, if you get a chance to, I think Strat language is burnt into a lot of our DNA, and that represents a high level scripting language that the designers would have put together in text, and that would get compiled into bytecode that the game could sort of at runtime interpret. So there's quite a fast iteration opportunity from that, rather than having everything hard coded. So we'd learnt that it's in our best interest to get to that place where we allow the designers the fastest flexibility to iterate on ideas and throw them away. In terms of the 3D engine, everything was pretty much new from Croc, from Creature Shop. We didn't take anything. I think the learnings we would have got around the capabilities of the machines, and the libraries and the tool chain. So I think Creature Shop gave us a good leg up in terms of how the PlayStation worked, how the Saturn worked, and the dev environment. So we kind of hit the ground running from dev there. We had no new machine added into the mix for Croc, so we were pretty good, pretty much able to take our learnings from Creature Shop on those platforms into the new place.
I was quite interested in that kind of the dual development there as well, because obviously Sega Saturn, I remember, the graphics on that were quads, and the PlayStation obviously polygons as well. What are the differences for Croc then between the two platforms then and the development of it?
There's a lot that's shared. There's a lot that doesn't need to be different. So the core game engine, including the interpreter and the game object logic scripting engine, is multi-platform. It's C code that you can take and run it under another compiler for the Saturn, and it should just work. .com, and the assets behind it, most of the game object assets are fairly portable. The differences are obviously in the rendering engines. We had a converter that took the models from 3D Studio. Then I took those and converted both the models and the animations into PlayStation objects or Saturn objects. So, but we use the same source models for those. I don't think there's anything specifically authored for Saturn or PlayStation. So, like for like assets, just ported or converted to the appropriate platform object format. On the renderer, so I wrote the renderer pretty much from scratch on the Saturn. I used the basic. I used the Sega Saturn basic libraries. I don't know. In hindsight, I should have considered the SGL libraries, which were the libraries that Sega then sort of matured for Virtua Fighter 2 and Virtual Cop and Sega Rally, and had given to the development community to make use of. They were like a level up significantly on what been the original libraries. They made things easier. Now, I have been questioning why in hindsight I didn't use those libraries. I think there's a little bit of sort of not blind optimism or youthful optimism, or just wanting to do things my own way and push things as hard as I could and learn the machine. So I don't look back and regret that. And I think what we got was something that was performant and as good as it could be. I don't think that SGL libraries would have significantly changed or improved that. But the one thing that I was keen to play with was the multiple processors. So the Saturn's got 2 SH2s, CPUs. PlayStation's got 1. I was interested in making use of those as to get the optimal performance. Now, I think in hindsight, so as I've gone through the industry and learnt more, I think there's different ways that I would approach that, but I'd still advocate using 2 SH2s rather than 1. A lot of developers just use 1 because it was easier, but I really wanted to explore using 2. And the setup that I arrived at was one of the SH2s would run the game logic, the game object updates, whilst the other SH2 would be rendering the previous frame, so taking the results of the other SH2s and rendering it. So it was. There are better ways of making use, I'm sure, of the SH2s, but it was quite a nice split between drawing and processing. So you could put those both onto each SH2 and get a little bit more performance out of that. And then the Saturn's also got this DSP chip in there, which you could throw 3D maths at and that obviously helped rendering transformations. So I was quite pleased to be able to go back to first principles and explore and play. The rendering chips, you've got VDP1 and VDP2, and VDP1's doing primarily the sprites and the polygon rendering. VDP2's doing the background planes of standard traditional character backgrounds that you get on many of the consoles at that time. But it also does the Mode 7 effects, sort of perspective floors, as you probably know.
I was just wondering as well then how the head was affected by these, because listeners might not know about this, but there was a certain way of booting it within the Saturn, and Croc's head would go missing, and then you'd just have certain elements of him left. And I think they had to put a note in some of the versions.
Ravi, I don't know what you're talking about.
It never happened.
It never happened. You didn't see it. Actually, many people didn't see Croc's head. So yeah, you're right. So this was something we found probably a week after release. We started getting calls from, our publisher Fox Interactive started getting calls from irate stores who were reporting people returning the game because it didn't work properly. And it turned out that didn't work properly was it loaded and Croc's head and some other parts of his body would disappear, had vanished, as well as other characters. I think some of the boss characters you will see without their heads. And for many people, there was no workaround. They had put the disc. This is crazy, right? They had put the disc in to their Saturn, they closed the disc drawer and they turned it on expecting it to work. Foolish them. What they didn't know is you had to boot the Saturn without the game, which took you to the disc from memory, the disc player menu. You put your audio tracks in, and then you put the disc Croc in, and then you closed it. The usual way of doing it. And then it worked. But obviously, there was a problem there. So what it came down, I think, to one register that we hadn't initialized, one bit in a register. It should have been a 0 and it was a 1 or vice versa. So just initializing that properly at the start of the game made all of this disappear. I've not actually traced through. I don't really have the willpower or I don't want to retread the grounds of tracing through and working out how exactly that could have led to certain polygons going missing in the model, but not all of them. I just can't work that out, and maybe I never will. But yeah, it was a relatively quick fix in the end, which was really annoying because if we'd taken that time, that just had 5 minutes before we pressed the disc.
And then it becomes legendary. So it's a happy mistake.
That's it. It was all intentional. No. But
we're still talking about it nearly 30 years later. So yeah.
But they did have to. They recalled as many discs as they could. They didn't recall them and keep them recalled. They recalled them, and at least some of them went back into market with a little slip saying, if Croc's head's missing, do this. So I think that's actually my copy I've got. It's got that slip. But we did fix it. I think they did a repress, and the Japanese version, which came out a couple of months later, has that completely fixed.
I bet there's people listening to this who had the game as a kid and didn't know about that. I always wondered why his head vanished. At least finally you're explaining it for people, which I like.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, what's the connection between Red Dog Superior Firepower and Croc? Because that seems like they wouldn't be connected in many ways.
Well, the connection is Sega, and they. At the time, when we were finishing up Croc, we were one of a few rapidly disappearing developers working on Saturn, certainly in the UK. So we had a lot of time and a lot of Sega's ear, because their studios were in London as well. Their offices were in London, so they're pretty much around the corner. So in terms of support, if we needed it, we could quickly jump on a bus and go around and show them the latest and talk about things. But they'd seen Croc a few times on the Saturn over 97, seen it evolving, and they liked it, and that gave them a degree of confidence that, one, there's a developer who still cares about us, and two, we kind of hopefully knew what we're doing. So at that stage, they had clearly put the death sentence on Saturn. They had the next gig lined up, and they were thinking up the next platform, which was going to become Dreamcast. So we got an opportunity early doors. I think late summer 97 or early summer 97. We got invited to go to Sega's offices in London and talk about their plans, and they presented what their ambitions were. And they also gave us an opportunity to pitch something on it. So they set some, I think from memory, they had set some constraints. They wanted something similar in style to the experience that Star Fox had been, which was like an on-rails choreographed bells and whistles effects shooter, showcase for their platform. Red Dog became more than that, but I think initially that's what they were interested in, us basically trying to replicate what we'd done before with Star Fox and Nintendo, but on their new platform. So we got opportunity throughout 97 to talk to them about the Dreamcast, and then put together a pitch for Red Dog, I think autumn of that year, and they commissioned us as a project. So as we were finishing up Croc, we were quickly starting up the first demos for Red Dog. And there is something on the internet somewhere that I shared it at the Nottingham show recently, but there is a video of that prototype, and there's links that the listeners can find to it, and that shows what we got to, so what we ended up with on that pitch. So we spent about 5 or 6 months putting together the first pitch. I think initially solely on PC because there was no hardware. But then we got the initial cards in for Dreamcast, which are basically Power VR cards at that stage. But they gave us a little bit of the power of a Dreamcast could deliver, so we could put together a meaningful prototype which showed a statement of intent. So we did that relatively quickly, and actually looking back, it still looks impressive. I want to play that. That's springs to mind. But that's how that started, and that's how the relationship started. It was through our work with Croc and the dialogue we enjoyed with Sega, and just having sort of the touching points with their technology team.
I thought it was a really fun title, and kind of went under the radar because it came out on the Dreamcast, and I thought it worked really well, looked really good, and I'm amazed to see that they've actually put out the source code on GitHub, which is really cool. So there may be ports coming out for other systems, hopefully in the future.
Yeah, who knows? I think Argonaut obviously have sort of risen again, Phoenix-esque, and Crocs came out earlier this year, so hopefully Red Dog's on the agenda. I don't know. Were you
involved with the Croc coming out this year?
Only in discussion. Like I said, I think that was the reason I went back to try and get my hard drive, because at the time, and I'm not sure if they have got it back, they were looking, they had the majority of things to put that master together or remaster together. I think it was the editor that was missing. They didn't have the source for that, and no one had the binaries. I don't know whether that's changed, but that's why I went back initially to try and resurrect this hard drive to find it. And I hadn't. After all of that effort, I still haven't found it. So I don't know that exists. But yeah, I was in contact initially to try and reclaim as much as I may have. But yeah, it's impressive to see that. It's really rewarding to see people who remember that from their childhood be given the chance to revisit it and then still get the warm and fuzzies from playing it, because I guess not many companies would put it out there as well. I think that's important to try and sort of share as much as possible, and to sort of reimagine these things and give them a new life to them where we can. So I don't know whether Red Dog's gonna be part of that agenda. I hope it is, and I'd hope I'll be involved with it if that was the case.
Well, another title that you worked on was, of course, their SWAT Global Strike Team that Ravi mentioned at the start. Now, that game had its roots in Police Quest, coming from Sierra, and that was a PC title. I mean, what was it like bringing that to console, and did you have to approach that differently to other titles that you'd worked on?
So that's interesting, because it started out as our own IP. So we had ambitions to do we had ambitions to do a squad-based action title, not necessarily first person. I think initially it was isometric. We wanted to do something more strategic, tactical and thoughtful, and we wanted to set it in our own universe. And we had the title initially was Cleaners, which represented this shadowy work for hire organisation, sort of an anti-A team that went around fixing the world's problems, but initially a three-man team with a leader and a technician and a sniper that you could control as two AI buddies. That quickly became a 3D, first-person viewpoint, and we were at the time playing a lot of Rainbow Six, many of us. So we're getting influenced by that, but we weren't thinking of SWAT. SWAT, as you said, like the Police Quest begat SWAT. There's a lineage there going way back to the early 90s.
It was very slow paced as well. SWAT was all about learning how to fire the gun, getting told off by an FMV instructor, and then slowly going through it, and then putting that on console. It could potentially be a very kind of dull game. It had that PC kind of focus.
And we tried to get the Cleaners idea sold, and we didn't have any success with it. Fantastic as it looks, that's another one, but recently resurrected some videos of, and I'm thinking, why didn't that work? At that time, it still looks impressive at the time, what we put together, in my opinion. But when we showed it at one of the E3s, I think it was 2001, Sierra Online, who were the developers, publishers behind Police Quest and SWAT, saw it, and so they immediately saw an opportunity to take what we'd got, which was basically first person controlling two buddies, into a SWAT space. And I think they had intentions at the time of moving into a console space anyway, so it looked a perfect fit. And the ambitions and design ambitions behind SWAT were very much what we originally wanted to do anyway. It was a more tactical type of game where you controlled the action and you had characters and buddies that you could choreograph and involve and put tactics and strategies together. So SWAT's perfect for that. As you say, it's a little bit slow paced, so, but I think that was the interesting thing, to take sort of the basic DNA that made SWAT what it was, but kind of put it on steroids for the console audience. I think it's a perfect complement.
There was a PS2 release and an Xbox as well, and they were quite different in how they worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had to, that's what took, I think from memory, it took 3 years of development. A lot of that was investing time building cross-platform technology so that we could service both a PC and an Xbox title with minor differences between them. Because at the end of the day, we had to release simultaneously, so we knew that we didn't have much chance to do one port version and then port the other. We had to be sort of showing progress on both platforms simultaneously. I think PlayStation 2 was by far the hardest.
I think it was quite a lot of lighting in there as well. So weren't you shooting out like lights? So the enemies would be plunged into darkness and you went into night vision and stuff. That must have been quite a tough thing to do on the PlayStation.
Yeah, and both platforms have got their strengths and weaknesses. I think the thing with the PlayStation is, even though they didn't necessarily have all of the effects or lighting capabilities that were easier to realise on the Xbox, you did have a very good fill rate on that machine. So you could do a lot with the multi-pass effects to emulate or get close to what the Xbox was doing. It was just harder. It was just harder to get the first principles rendering up and running. As soon as you got that to that stage where you're actually able to draw polys, it wasn't plain sailing, but that was a strong leg up. You saw rapid progress thereafter, but it took us a fair while to get to the stage where we were even getting the basic triangle renderer going on that thing. But yeah, eventually it caught up, and both titles I think are as strong as each other. I don't think there's anything either of the platforms had that the other didn't.
Well, Matt, it's been incredible to hear some of your memories from your time at Argonaut. I mean, I know you have worked in the industry for, the last couple of decades as well. You've done much more as well. I mean, just to kind of wrap things up today, I mean, what are you working on these days then?
I'm at a company called Dovetail Games in North Kent, and we do train simulations, so Train Sim World, and we do fishing titles, Bassmaster, amongst others. And we're still continuing those, so they occupy my day-to-day. There's some exciting stuff coming up as well, new stuff that I'm not at liberty to say. So, yeah, still very much sort of hands-on with games dev and loving every minute of it.
Nice to hear the passion still burns strong. That's good. Awesome, Matt. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on and being our guest this week. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, guys. Thank you for the invite.